The War of 1812 was fought between the United States and Britain. It is sometimes called the Second War of Independence. There were several events that led up to the War of 1812. Remember how we had purchased the Louisiana Territory from France and Napoleon? Well, Britain was at war with France against Napoleon and didn't want the United States to trade with France. The British Navy captured our ships and forced sailors to join the Royal Navy. And Britain supported the Native American tribes in an effort to prevent the United States from expanding to the west. Americans were angry with the British for other reasons too. Before the Revolutionary War, British built forts west of the Appalachian Mountains. When the Americans won the Revolution, British promised to hand over the forts. But by 1812, 29 years later, the British still held on to their forts. They wouldn't let the settlers move west. Some people wanted to fight Britain again, but others didn't. They thought their trade would be interrupted. James Madison was the president of the United States, and he declared war on Great Britain and attacked Canada, and most of the fighting took place along the Great Lakes. They burned their Parliament buildings. In retaliation, the British troops attacked the Capitol building and destroyed all the books in the Library of Congress. Then they headed for the president's house. Dolley Madison, the wife of the president, was about to have a dinner party, but had to leave and grab as many things as possible. She grabbed the portrait of George Washington, among other valuables, and she and her guests fled the building. When the British arrived, they ate the dinner that was still on the table before they burned the mansion down. The British began to fight back and used their superior navy to block the U.S. trade and attack ports on the East Coast. They also attacked the port of New Orleans. The U.S. Navy only had about 1,000 men and 15 warships, and the Royal Navy had 600 ships and 130,000 men. These victories were important turning points of the wars. The USS Constitution was most noted for her actions during the War of 1812 against the United Kingdom or Britain, when she captured numerous merchant ships and defeated 5 British warships. There are many significant battles in the War of 1812, the Battle of Tippecanoe, the Battle of Fort Mackinac, the massacre at Fort Dearborn, Battle of Queenston's Heights, Battle of Frenchtown, Battle of Lacolle Mills, Battle of York, Siege at Fort Meigs, Surrender of Fort Detroit, Battle of the Thames, Battle at Lake Erie, the Creek War, Battle of Chippewa, Battle of Lundy's Lane, Battle of Bladensburg, the Rising of Washington, Battle of Plattsburgh, Siege of Baltimore, Battle of Chrysler's Farm, and the Battle of New Orleans. Tecumseh, chief of the Shawnee tribe, became known as a brave warrior. He fought in many raids against the encroaching white man. Tecumseh wanted to unite the Indian tribes into a single confederacy. He was a gifted speaker, and he began to go to other tribes to convince them that the only way to fight the United States was to unite and create their own country. He was hoping by being allies with the British in the War of 1812 that the Native Americans could gain their own country. He fought in the Battle of Detroit, Battle of Tippecanoe, and was killed at the Battle of Thames. When politicians on the East Coast began to complain about the freedom of the seas in 1812, few Wisconsin residents paid attention. But when hostilities actually broke out and the British captured Mackinac, Indians and settlers were forced to pick a side. Wisconsin's French residents and Indians tended to side with the British rather than the Americans. In 1814, these American loyalists living in Wisconsin built Fort Shelby on the St. Fero Island at Prairie du Chien. They were led by William Clark, the U.S. Superintendent of Indian Affairs at St. Louis and the co-commander of the Lewis and Clark expedition of 1804 to 1806. The American Loyalists wanted to keep the upper Mississippi fur trade out of British hands, and the British managed to take the only American gunboat out of action and lay siege to Fort Shelby. The Americans surrendered and lost the fort to the British. The British were gaining ground in the War of the Battle of Baltimore, which lasted 3 days, from September 12th to the 15th in 1814. Over several days, British ships bombarded Fort McHenry in an effort to make their way to Baltimore. However, U.S. troops were able to hold off the much larger British force, causing the British to withdraw. This victory proved to be an important turning point in the war. An American lawyer named Francis Scott Key was one of the men in charge of prisoner exchanges and watched the final battle from his ship. In the dawn's early light, he looked through a telescope and saw a flag still waving over the fort. He wrote a poem which became our song, The Star-Spangled Banner. The U.S. and Great Britain signed a peace treaty called the Treaty of Ghent on December 24th, 1814. The War of 1812 was very important for several reasons. First, it changed the course of American history. Because America still managed to fight the world's greatest military power to a virtual standstill, it gained international respect. It also instilled a greater sense of nationalism among its citizens. The Federalist Party, founded by Alexander Hamilton and the once dominant political party in America, declined dramatically following the War of 1812, as its members had opposed the war. While the War of 1812 had virtually no impact on England, it did assure the survival of the British colonies in Canada and ultimately paved the way for the Canadian Confederation, the precursor to the nation of Canada. Some historians believe if the War of 1812 had not happened, Canada would have become part of the United States because so many Americans would have migrated north. Finally, the war broke the back of the remaining Indian confederations east of the Mississippi. The Iroquois in the north and the Creek people in the south both allied with Britain during the war, and for them, the conflict was devastating. It put an end to the native power east of the Mississippi and laid the groundwork for Indian removal to western reservations.